Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches to deliver great results and growth in your agribusiness through better execution. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Welcome, Pacesetters of Agribusiness, to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod. I'm your host, Joe Mosier. Thanks for choosing to spend your time with us today. Last month, you may recall that I did an interview with Scott Porter from Cascadia Capital. Now, the episode was ostensibly about the M&A outlook for Q4 of 25 and, more importantly, all of 2026. And in that conversation, we talked a lot of aspects about the M&A market. What was interesting is that when I asked Scott, who's an investment banker, a guy who's paid to masterfully analyze and synthesize and make meaning of numbers, when I asked him what consistently leads to higher valuations and higher market demand for agribusinesses are looking to transact, he said one thing: skilled operators and the right talent leading the business. And I think that's really interesting. You know, as time goes on, more and more processes in our businesses are automated. More transactions are customer self-service oriented, you know, online portals and different systems, et cetera, and apps. And even, you know, some of the machines that we use, whether it's on the farm or in our facilities, they increasingly operate themselves to some degree. And yet, people remain the differentiator. And people, especially the right people, are increasingly more challenging to identify, to hire, to develop, and to retain. So if people are the differentiator, they're also the operating constraint for many of us in trying to grow our agribusinesses and create the futures that we want. And make no mistake about it, the talent shortages that we are facing in ag today are structural, not cyclical. This isn't a matter of just turning over one generation to the next. There's no sort of goal line here where this suddenly resolves itself and we come back into equilibrium. You don't merely weather this storm. You have to navigate the storm, and you have to make progress despite it. Because frankly, from my perspective, there's no comforting horizon on the distance when it comes to talent. And to help us think about all of this, to help us think about talent acquisition and employee development and leadership succession planning and the importance of rooting all of your people decisions in your strategy in the future you're trying to create, today I want to share a conversation that I recently had with Mark Waschek, who's the president of Ag1Source. Ag1Source is an executive recruiting firm with more than 20 years of a track record of helping ag leaders throughout North America exceed their goals through talent acquisition and improved retention. Mark and his team work on talent and executive recruiting across agribusiness. You know, this includes agronomy and seed, grain and biofuels, meat and produce, animal nutrition and health, and even livestock production. What's interesting to me was, you know, Mark himself started his career as a sales agronomist within the cooperative system, and many of the people on his team come from the industry. And so it reflects the deep business acumen that they bring to the work that they do for their clients every day, and frankly, to the credibility and the perspective that Mark's going to bring to our conversation today. This show, the Pacesetter Pod, is all about amplifying voices, about aggregating perspectives and trying to elevate our shared thinking around strategy execution in agribusiness. And I just want to say thank you for taking the time to tune in today. Thank you for being a part of the Pacesetter Pod community. Thank you for being future-oriented as you think about your organization. And with that, let's jump over to my conversation with Mark Waschek of Ag1Source. Mark, welcome to the Pacesetter Pod.
Thank you very much. Excited to be here.
I am excited to have you on the show today. You know, the agribusiness, like any other business, really is a reflection of the quality, the skills, the competency of the people that populate that business. And so in this show, we talk a lot about the role of people and how we execute strategy and successfully grow agribusinesses. But I don't know that we've had as much deliberate focus on folks that work as advisors and partners to agribusiness owners and management around how do you define, identify, hire, and retain some of that key talent to advance your strategy. So I'm really excited to have you on. A lot of stuff we want to cover today, Mark, but before we get into the specific discussion topics, maybe take a few moments here to tell us about AgSource One, what you all do, the ag markets you serve and the type of clients that you work with.
Sure. So we are an executive recruiting firm. We've been around for about 23 years. I've been part of the organization for almost 20 of those 23 years. Prior to that, my career was in the cooperative system with Cenex Land O'Lakes, AgriAlliance, and CHS, ranging from my career started as a sales agronomist in the field, moving up into management in the organization and on to the petroleum division of the Cenex brand. So I've been involved with agriculture my whole career, which got me interested in the team at Ag One Source. That a couple of friends of mine actually started that company. They were formerly in the recruiting industry in another firm and just wanted to do things different. So when they built this firm, they built it focused on clients and client needs today and in the future. And we have therefore expanded our team to cover all facets of agriculture, from crop production and crop inputs to livestock to equipment to grain, food processing. And we build our teams around each of those industries from the industries that they come from. So we have agronomy people that are working in the agronomy sector, we have livestock people in the livestock sector, and so on. The other thing that makes our business a little unique is that from the start, which was a lot easier to do today than it was 23 years ago, we have a remote team. So I live in Minnesota. Our company is based in Kansas. We have had people all over the country as parts of our team. And back in the old days, that was a lot of conference calls. Today, obviously, it's a lot different. But that was one of the unique things in our organization, that when we got started, we were able to better serve each of those markets because we not only come from the industries, but we geographically understand the differences in each of the areas as well.
Yeah, that's lovely. And also, I mean, the enablement of technology, the enablement that's allowed through technology to keep people close to where the clients and the work happens, and also to build your business around where the talent resides. There's always that idea that if you are only going to hire within a specific metropolitan area or MSA, you've now self-imposed limits on the number, quality, and profile of people you have. But when you are open to that, and I think a talent recruiting firm is uniquely positioned to be able to make that happen, it's certainly beneficial. I also appreciate about you guys, not to make this a commercial, but like you said, you started your career off as a sales agronomist and then got into energy and propane. And so similar with many other folks in your business, is coming from this work helps you understand some of the things, the characteristics, the behavioral components, the value alignment, things that are hard to codify
Right.
in a job
Exactly.
description, and things that are also hard to suss out maybe early on in evaluating candidates. So I think a unique profile and approach that you all bring. Let's get into it. One of the things that I observe, and we work with a lot of co-ops, privately held operators along the ag supply chain. And one of the things that I find it hard to reconcile, though I see it all the time, is these competing messages between we have these big layoffs at some companies where they basically have to shed a bunch of talent for commercial or cost reasons. But then you also have businesses, some of them small, some of them large, that are having incredible challenges staffing their facilities, finding people. And then, of course, there's a distribution in between. But you've got this, we've got too many people, we're shedding people, and we can't find enough people. We don't have the right people. And I know that this is a location and timing issue as well, but
Sure.
with your bird's eye view of the ag talent market, would you say, are we in a surplus, a talent surplus, or a talent deficit environment right now, Mark?
I would say we're in a talent deficit market. And that's a linear issue for the last 20 years. And it's actually just based on population, honestly. So it's not just agriculture, but all major universities are struggling because of declining population and the shift in population from wanting to go to college. Agriculture in particular, aside from the shifting population, there's fewer younger people going to college as opposed to the baby boomer generation, larger sector, right? Is there's fewer kids coming from agricultural backgrounds that even have the wherewithal or desire to go to college for an ag degree, right? And I'm not saying, and granted, I'm not talking specifically about roles that require an ag degree, but I'm just saying that happens across the board, whether it's a 2-year school or no school at all. if you don't come from an agricultural background, you're less likely to want to go into it. Now, we all know people that came from Chicago and have great careers in agriculture. So I'm not saying it's possible, but I'm just saying from the masses, that's a declining population pool to pull from. On top of that, you have 10,000 people turning 65 a day in this country, right? So you have a lot of folks that are retiring, and obviously the stock market is doing okay right now, and it's a great time for people to pull the pin and retire and move to a tax-free state and enjoy what money they've earned. So you have more people leaving the industry than are truly capable of coming in, creating that deficit, regardless of swings of layoffs and those types of things.
In this idea of the fewer kids or fewer young people that are coming from agricultural backgrounds, getting degrees, and then wanting to work in agriculture, this is a base of the pyramid problem. Then, so it's, I'm going to guess when we say talent deficit, so you said we're in a talent deficit environment. That's clear at the base of the pyramid, staffing the facilities, sales agronomist roles, elevator operators, take your pick, truck drivers, etc. But as you go into more advanced management roles, whether it's, middle management, upper management, executive type roles, what are you seeing there in terms of the distribution of relative deficit to surplus and availability of people?
Still a deficit for a slightly different reason. And this goes back to the early 2000s, around Y2K. In agriculture, there was a massive downsizing in all sectors of agriculture around then. That's when we went from, I don't know the exact numbers, but it was over 25 crop protection chemical manufacturers down to like 8 or something like that. Same thing with fertilizer companies, seed companies, all different equipment. That's the big consolidation in the ag equipment market. All those things happened from the late 90s to the early 2000s. So if you think about people that are now in their early 50s to mid to late 60s, that would be typically in those leadership roles, a lot of those folks went to college, got out of college, went to work for those companies, and during that massive restructuring, they lost their jobs. And in that case, there was truly a surplus market. There weren't as many jobs. Many of them left agriculture forever at that point in time. And so if there is a major deficit of people in that age group that left the industry in the early 2000s that would typically be leaders today. So now we are reaching down into the 30 to 40-year-olds, which is great from a skill set and talent standpoint. There's just less of them, right? You've eliminated half the population there.
That's interesting. So it's almost this long tail risk of those macro level restructuring events that then echo decades later and create a relative shortage. In the clients that you work with, this willingness to reach down deeper into the organization to bring people up into senior roles, or to look at a candidate that's maybe younger than they conventionally would be, or earlier in their career than they usually would be for a type of role coming from outside. Is that being done strictly out of necessity, or are boards and upper management becoming more comfortable with taking bigger risks on this younger talent? Kind of how does that dynamic play out in the work you guys are doing of actually putting a guy or a gal who's in their mid to late 30s in a role where the predecessor that's retiring is in their early 60s, right?
Exactly.
There's no one in between handed off to. How does that actually work out in reality?
Well, I think we also have to consider part of the reason that we're in this situation is that I'll pick on the agricultural industry as a whole. Any ag operation, whether it's ag retail or even a manufacturer, as an industry, we're very proud of our assets and investments, right? The number of smokestacks you have is a show of strength, right? They will say publicly, people are our most important asset. But when it comes to where are they going to put their money in terms of investing, they are going to repair and grow and maintain their structural assets as opposed to their employees, up to the point where they have to. And where I'm coming from is, and I'll pick on retail agronomy as the easy example, work with retail agronomy organizations all over the country. Until recently, they would all say, yes, we have a training program. We're doing everything we can to develop our agronomy employees. What they're doing is they are doing what they had to from a technical standpoint to make sure that their employees were competent in doing their job. But when you look at the dollar of spend, just a very, very, very small sliver of those dollars were actually going to career development and the skill set they would need to become a leader in the future. They were pouring all their money into maximizing the return on the investment with their current role from a technical perspective, right? And that didn't help things today. So aside from the fact, as we talked before, declining population in that leadership, quote unquote, leadership age era, you have younger people that weren't getting the investments in them that they needed to become leaders. And that's why when you say it seems like boards and organizations are far more willing today to make that investment, they are, because they have to, right? And it has forced organizations, even small retailers throughout the Midwest, to actually invest more in training than they ever have. And they now see the value in actually growing your own versus buying on the outside like they used to be able to do. It used to be, well, our manager's retiring, we'll just get another one when he retires. And now they're realizing that isn't so easy anymore. We need, for the sustainability of our business, we really need to start investing in our own people and really do succession planning. They all said they should be doing it. They never did it, but now they have to.
Yeah. This is a creature of scarcity. It's driving behavior change just to the scarcity of talent out there. I came from a very large organization where, I joined early career, but not directly out of college. I had roughly 6-7 years of professional experience before I joined the first agribusiness that I worked for. And I was, at the time, it was a bit different. That didn't happen quite so often. Right? Someone didn't come directly in out of college, but it did change over time that you started to have a little bit more horse trading, maybe fewer coming directly from one ABCD to another one, but you would get folks from other companies. I always had the assumption that among the smaller companies, there was also a reluctance to bring people in from the outside. But what I'm hearing you say is that perhaps that wasn't the case, that the talent on the outside was the pressure relief valve for where you had failed to develop people.
Correct. And I think there was a time period in the middle where people were actually fairly willing, out of need, to hire people from the outside, but didn't realize that they needed to change their training program, right? So again, I'll pick on an agronomy retailer. If you hire somebody that grew up on a farm and you hire somebody that had never been on a farm before, regardless of how much weed ID training you give them, there's still an aspect to the job of how to relate to farmers, how to understand the farming operation, how to understand the cooperative system, whatever it may be, that the person that coming from a metropolitan area just needs time to learn and understand. But if they weren't willing to give them that latitude or teach or give them the tools to understand that, they fail every time, right? The turnover rate was incredibly high. So we went through this era where people were saying, well, we can't hire on the outside. They never work out, right? It's like, well, you maybe didn't give them the right resources to be successful in the first place.
And when you talk about these training programs, and we're kind of pointing at maybe some of the technical aspects of roles, both you need to train people who bring from the outside, but now increasingly these companies, these agribusinesses, looking at providing that technical training to their younger, earlier career talent as a way of actually owning their pipeline. Right?
Exactly.
Are you also, I don't want to make any assumptions here, but do you also see investments around, let's just call it broadly, leadership development? So the non-agribusiness technical capability build that is required, but also creating people leaders of the future, creating folks that can think broadly about the business, people who can think about how do you drive change and strategy. Is that starting to also catch up to where it needs to be, or is that a opportunity for agribusinesses writ large?
Right. I think that is one of those areas that is starting to catch up, but still has a long ways to go. Right. So an example would be as if you go up to the next level, when you have a person that manages a team of on the farm salespeople leave an organization, it's not uncommon for the organization to say, well, this is a person on the sales team that's been with us the longest, or the person that gets along with everybody, or whatever reason they choose, say, congratulations, we're promoting you. You're now the sales manager. That person has never managed a person before, right? Now, organizations will say, we are now after the fact going to be training that person in, but that takes time, right? And during that time, the lack of skill could be creating turnover and other problems in the organization, and it just creates this mess, as opposed to saying, Bill is going to be retiring in the next 2 years. Maybe we should run a couple of our top salespeople through a program to develop their skill set to become better salespeople. We can only hire one, but we
Mm-hmm.
may actually be in a situation where if we grow, we need multiple regional sales managers anyway. So let's move forward with this. And guess what? You'll never lose those two salespeople because they're on a career path. They're on a track, right? No matter what crazy recruiter from Ag One Source gives them a call, they're going to say, "Hey, that's a great opportunity, but I'm on a path here, right? I'm not going to, I'm 3/4 of the way through this. I'm not going to leave now."
Right.
So they're missing that stickiness opportunity by not investing early enough.
Well, and so you said something really important there. So you're not, in that case, you take 3 individuals and you say, we're going to start to develop them for a role that we have high confidence will be available 24 months from now, for example.
Yep.
And some folks may say, well, then you're going to create internal tension. You have 3 people competing for the job. Well, there's 2 problems with that. The one that you pointed to is you're assuming that you only ever need one of that position.
Right.
And that would be a sad state of affairs if you only ever needed one of that next role. Ideally, you have a variety of demands at that level. But I think also in this idea, this classic example of the crackerjack salesperson being promoted to sales manager and then not doing well, you need to vet and determine if the person actually wants to be in a sales management position. And they might not know until they get some exposure to it via something like a training program. So maybe it is an 18-month program.
Exactly.
And 12 months in, Mark says, "Hey, you know what? I really appreciate your confidence in me. I appreciate the trust. I appreciate all the investment, and I've learned a lot. If I had to, of course, I would take one for the team and step into this position. But all things being equal, I don't know that this is where my passion lies. I'd rather be walking up driveways and working with farmers to solve problems on the farm."
Exactly.
And what a gift to know that when the person is still in a sales position.
And when that new leader is named, they have an automatic champion in that person because they know what that person is willing to do and be through, and they don't want it, so they are 100% on board with not having the role at that point in time.
And also, you build in some latent redundancy in the system too. So if that new sales manager has a family emergency or has knee surgery and they're laid up for a couple of weeks or whatever it might be, you have somebody who's got just enough exposure that they can probably step in and keep things between the ditches for a period of time. So there's a lot of residual benefits of that.
Exactly.
Let's play with this idea of, kind of building on that idea of developing talent for the company that you want to have, not the company that you have today. As a business grows, as a business scales, and that could be in product diversity, geographic diversity, just volume of sales and customers, whatever it might be, how do you define that growth? There's a variety of other challenges that we see that pop up. And it's less about the work that gets done, but how the work gets done. And so I'm thinking some classic examples of, you start to see tension on the system around managing people at a distance. Right? When you no longer have everyone officing in the same location on Mondays, and they're on the road every day the rest of the week. Now, all of a sudden, people are 2 states away, and you only see them quarterly, for example. You sometimes see in smaller organizations, they really value the generalist, the people that have kind of done a little bit of every job in the business. They have one job that they're supposed to do, but they've kind of done it all. Right. And then as the business grows, there becomes a greater need for specialization. And I could go on with a lot of examples, but from a talent perspective, Mark, because you guys are at the forefront of helping leaders identify their talent needs and then go out and find those candidates, what are some of the biggest points of tension or requirements for growth on the talent side as the underlying business itself is scaling and expanding? Where do problems tend to show up that we don't necessarily expect them to be?
I would say that there's a couple of areas, though. What I can tell you is it starts at the top, meaning even when I'm working with boards of directors to fill CEO positions, the hardest thing for a board of directors to think about is, and this is especially the case when you have a retirement, So when you have a CEO that's retiring and the board has connected with us to find the next CEO of that organization, typically, because it's a retirement, that means the person is doing a phenomenal job. They love the way they're running things and hope it continues down that path. Otherwise, he wouldn't still be the CEO. The problem is getting the board to realize that they are not contracting with Ag One Source to replace the outgoing leader. They are using us to find the next leader of their organization. Those are two different things, right? That I am more interested in what their 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year expectations are versus what they like about the last leader. Now, there may be a lot of overlap. There may even be 100% overlap, but they have to prove that to me, because otherwise, if we hire a person that does things the exact same way and we get 2 years down the road, they may not be happy because things aren't moving fast enough because they missed the target. And that happens all the way down the chain. So even when a CEO is looking at replacing a VP, or a VP is looking at replacing a director, getting the last person out of the job, if they loved how they were doing it, out of their mind and truly looking at where do they want to go. And you said it right. How do you want to get there is the most important thing. Because I guarantee every single board that I sit down with will say, our number one goal is profitability. And I'll say, whoa, let's talk about that for a minute. So you're okay if I bring you one leader that has the ability to grow this business organically, grow the top line, and grow your net profit. But you're equally as happy if a person in the 11th month realizes he's behind budget and shuts down 3 locations to get back in the black. Well, we don't want that. And I said, well, maybe we should dig into the how a little bit, right? So let's focus on not just where you're going, but how you want to get there. And this even applies especially to sales roles and sales managers and all of those things, top to bottom. The how is the most easily overlooked thing. Even when you're hiring entry-level people, you can look at a resume and say, my gosh, this person's great. They've grown sales every single year for our competitor. We're going to overpay them to join our team. And the person flops. And they didn't dig into the how, right? Because if that person was building sales every year because they had a great territory with established customers that they grew with the customers, and then you hire that person expecting them to do total business development every single day, they are going to fail. That's not their happy place, right? But on paper, it all looked good. And that's just, like I said, the how is so overlooked in this whole process, top to bottom.
So back to this idea around these are my words, not yours, but the board, they in this case is the board, is coming to you. And the way they're talking about it is looking for a replacement for the person that was there, which, let's be honest, that's the best odds of having a replacement of the talent you have is their lieutenant in the business. And if you don't have somebody in the business ready to step in, not to say that the people within the same organization are interchangeable, it's not the case, but they're most likely to mirror and mimic and emulate the behaviors of their former boss. But if they come to you and they're looking for replacement, not reinvention, how do you coach them through that? I mean, because you're not a therapist, Mark. I mean, you're a sales agronomist. You've probably been in therapy type roles a couple of times, but actually getting them to confront the fact that, look, Dave was great. We love Dave. Dave retiring is a cause for celebration and mourning. Great for Dave, terrible for us. But if we can't go look for the next Dave, because the next Dave is not what this business needs, how do you help them get there?
Walk them through a process. We call it the 4 pillars process. So we focus on 4 things. Again, doesn't matter if this is an entry-level hire or a CEO. Culture, behavioral style, performance profile, and then skills and experience. And I walk them through a process where I get them to really realize that where they are today may not actually be where they want to go tomorrow, even with culture. Because at the surface, everybody say, no, our manager's doing a great job. We have a great culture. We dig into, so what could be better? And one of the things I do in that case to get at the culture, again, using your example of a board of directors, is a lot of times they don't know what it's like to actually work there. They know what it's like to be on the board. They know the culture of the boardroom and the relationship with the CEO. They know what it's like to be a customer in some cases. So I get their permission to actually interview employees to find out how it really works. And it is not an uncommon situation where the board will tell me it's a great culture with great communication, open door policy. And I actually had this recently where I visited with the employees, and the employees said, "Yeah, it's an open door policy, but I'll never walk in that door because I'll get my head bit off." Right. So you it's all perspective. So we say, okay, maybe there's point number one where we need to shift, right? And then we start talking about what is the right style of leader, given that you want to make that shift, or given the fact that you want to grow the organization, what is the right style of leader for that situation? And then we dig into, hopefully, in a lot of cases, not always, they have done some strategic planning before sitting down with me. And it's a very common in the cooperative system only because it's very common and right for their patrons and members to actually say, before we hire a CEO, should we explore opportunities to merge, or are we willing to reinvest our equity to grow the business type of thing? Very common discussion, both inside and outside of the cooperative system, right? So they've been through a little bit of that. They are determined that when they meet with me, that they are ready to hire another CEO and they are ready to grow the organization. We start digging into, based on all the things you want to accomplish, let's get into the how, right? How do you define the profitability? How do you define, let's say you want to reduce employee turnover or grow employee retention, however you want to look at it. We get into those things and they start realizing, wow, we really like the last guy, but the next guy is going to have to now do all these things a lot differently and better than the last guy, right?
Yep.
So by the time we get to the skills and experience, what they thought were the skills and experience are very different, right? Because we've remapped their vision of where they are and where they want to be and what it's going to take to get there.
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
And in this type of a process where you're actually, I would say you're anchoring the definition of that next CEO position to the desired outcomes of the strategy, and you're reverse engineering that role to, rather than we've got our strategy, we're going to plug another person into it. We're actually saying, okay, what does the strategy require of our leader? And now let's start from square one and build out that profile of the successful candidate. When you do that work with a board, Mark, do you recommend including the incumbent CEO who's on their way out? Let's assume in this case that person's 6 to 9 months away from the actual retirement date.
Right.
Are they helpful in that process? Do they hold the process back? Does it really depend on the characteristics of that individual? What are your thoughts there?
I'm 100% against it, of them being involved. And regardless of, I know that every single one of them has the right intentions, both the board and the outgoing leader, to want to be part of the process. But if that person is in the room, number one, we don't have the open dialogue about what could be better, right? Because they love the guy or gal, right? And they're doing a great job. So they aren't going to give anything that could even be a hint of a negative comment if they're in the room. But it's really hard to think forward about what you could be and how you can get there with the person in the room that has been with you for the last 20 years. You are always going to go back to how they did it in every answer you give. I've experienced this, right? So, and again, a lot of boards feel that that person should be in the room, but when I explain it like that, and in some cases, we've let them be in the room for maybe half of the session just to get a flavor for it. And then I nicely ask the CEO to step out so we can talk openly, and they get it, right? The board realizes, wow, we actually weren't talking about a lot of those things with them in the room. So it's a very interesting dynamic. Again, a good CEO will also understand the fact that they aren't replacing them; they're finding the next leader. Good leaders will recognize that, right?
Well, I think it's also not necessarily binary. You could say, the board is going to be responsible for providing oversight to this next executive of this business. They're going to be evaluating their performance. They're going to be coaching them. They're going to be validating their decisions. They're going to live with the outcome of their decision. Mr. and Mrs. Current CEO, you're not going to be here for that.
Exactly.
And so this is really an important transition step for them to undertake this work on their own. However, you tell me if you agree with this or not, but you might say, we would love your input when we have something that we're ready to move forward with. We might run it past you to say, what comments or questions do you have? What are the things that are not clear, et cetera? You have the opportunity to get their input without seeking their approval along the way.
Yep.
One of the, I think, and this is maybe in the co-op space, though not exclusively, particularly with the long-term chief executives who have a lot of trust and almost deference from the board. The boards are looking to them to make a recommendation, and they'll maybe ask some questions, but they're probably default going to support. And that's, to be clear, that's not necessarily weak governance. That's also earned credibility. These are people that have led the business successfully for a number of years.
Very common situation.
Very common situation. That's why I asked the question of, do you want them in the room or not? Because sometimes, even when the CEO is saying, guys, you need to make this decision. I'm not going to be here to live with the outcomes of the decision, right? This is all because I'm headed to the beach. That's why we're doing this work. If they're in the room, you can pose questions. You can see them all turn and look for the CEO to respond first.
Right.
And then they'll take their signals from there. Again, rooted in trust, rooted in shared success, rooted in familiarity, all good things, but probably suboptimal to the outcomes that you want.
Exactly. That's probably truly the case 8 out of every 10 board meeting. That is exactly the situation, right? When you have a retiring leader, the board has so much trust, they look to them for input. And that's also the valuable part of this experience. And you said it best, that they're hiring, they have one employee, and they're responsible for hiring and leading that employee. This has to be their decision. And that's why it's so important for them to come to these decisions on their own. I go to the performance profile where we start digging into what are the 3 to 5 most important things this person has to accomplish in their first year, because I need all 6 to 12 of them to agree 100% collectively that those are the most important things, so that when you sit down with them for the annual review, you are all in agreement that those are the black and white things that they needed to get done, right? The other thing we do as part of the process is it goes to the culture, behavioral style, and even skills and experience. The value of all of them being in the room and coming to these conclusions together, they all get their thoughts out on the table. Because if we wouldn't be doing this, if they would just give me the job description and say, here's the job, here's the location, here's the pay range, I could bring them lots of candidates. When we bring those candidates for an interview, they're all thinking about something different in their mind of what their ideal candidate looks like, right?
Yep.
Somebody may want a highly driven, highly motivated person. Another person say, you know what, we had some problems in accounting last year. I really want a detail-oriented guy to make sure that goes over the books every day, right? Totally different people. They'll never agree, or they may actually turn off the best candidate because they haven't agreed on these parameters ahead of time. And that's why it's so important to meet together. And that's the other reason why I feel that, again, best intentions are there from the outgoing manager to be part of that process, but they can't be in the room. That group needs to come to a conclusion on their own, maybe for the first time in 20 years, right? But this is the first step in that process, for sure.
So I'm going to present you with a scenario here. You've got a board that knows that they need to backfill in 6 to 9 months, whatever that window is. The CEO, they know they need to own the decision. They are probably not super comfortable with that, but they recognize it, which is a step in the right direction. They understand and agree that the CEO, this infamous Dave, is not going to be part of the process. That you will now be walking them through it. But you start to talk about what are these things that have to get done, and maybe they're a little bit flimsy or ill-defined. You start saying, well, what is the strategy? And you start to realize that they don't actually have a robust strategic plan that defines success 3 to 5 years in the future. Do you proceed, or do you then require them to go back and do some of that strategic planning? Because I would imagine it's pretty hard to hire the next leader if you see this big deficiency gap in actual underlying strategy, because you can fill the role, Mark, and that'll be a profitable engagement, right? However the fee structure works, you'll put them in that position. Sure. But I'm guessing you also probably want that person to be successful for the sake of your brand and also your own values. So how do you deal with it when a group actually lacks a quality enough strategic plan or strategy that you could, reverse engineer the goals and the profile of the next leader from it?
Good question, because that's actually a fairly common situation. Again, when you have situations where there's been a manager for 10 to 20 years and the board is comfortable with their leadership, they rely less on strategic planning and more on the ideas that the manager brings to the boardroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that I approach that is I do a simple continue, stop, create exercise with the board, right? If they haven't had a strategic plan in the last few years, we say, okay, what's working great for the company? What's working great for the employees? What's working great for your patrons, that whatever it is, you want to make sure the new manager embraces and continues. And then we talk about, okay, what isn't working and has to flat out stop, right? Or be fixed. And we go through the list again: company, employees, patrons, customers. And then we do the create, which is what are the things in these areas you've talked about that you want to do that couldn't get done? Or what are some things on the horizon that may come up that this person's going to have to address in one of these three areas? And so we have an hour or two of discussion around all of these things. I've got papers stuck all over the wall of the boardroom at that point in time. And then we vote. We say, okay, I'm giving you each 5 votes, right? So let's go around the room and put your weight on what you feel are the most important things. And it's not uncommon for the top 2 things to be very consistent around the board. They just didn't realize it, right? But they end up talking things through, and we can even have good discussion of, wow, I didn't see that as an issue. Why do you feel that's an issue? And then, the discussion grows from there. And it may be that a couple of board members know about something going on that the others don't, right? So it becomes a little bit enlightening, much like a strategy session, but very compressed. Because really, like I said, my goal is, if there isn't a strategic plan, I at least need to get them all on the same page for what they feel are the most important things. Because I need to know that whatever candidate we bring to the table is capable of addressing those 3 to 5 things, right? If there isn't enough time to learn on the job fast enough to hit a 1-year mark. So they have to be capable of doing that. And we use that as part of our screening process to prove they can do that. Usually in that case, I am almost always, if there's 5 items on that list, the 5th one is always have a completed strategic plan by December 31st, right? So because we went through this experience, they now realize how important it is to do that on a regular basis. And they'll probably all continue it forward, whether they need a CEO or not. It really helps them realize, wow, we're the board, but we've been relying on our employee to tell us what to do. And that's not how this is supposed to go, right? So it's eye-opening for them.
Eye-opening to say the least. And I ask, I don't want to get into too many details, but we did an engagement earlier this year with a co-op client that was looking at a variety of different strategic options available to them, and all under the within the context of the fact that the existing CEO had announced their intent to retire within the next, I think it was the next 24 to 36 months. I can't remember exactly when the clock had started. So not urgent, not going to happen right now, but going to happen. And as you rightfully said, Mark, one of the things that came up was, well, potentially, that might be a reason for us to look at a merger. And so in the course of the discussions, one of the things that we try to do is sometimes, if there's not inherent urgency in a decision, let's not create it. We don't need to fall victim to urgency, much less false urgency. But we said, look, a merger might be exactly what this business needs, and it might be exactly the right lever to pull for CEO succession planning. But that is an incredibly high risk one-way door to walk through, because you cannot unring that bell.
Exactly.
Let's use the luxury of time that we have to talk about what we want this business to look like. And we picked, I think, 5 years into the future because we knew definitively that would be in the post-current CEO era.
Right.
Let's talk about what that business needs to look like. We're not talking about merger partners. We're not talking about CEO succession. We're not talking about specific capital investments. We're talking about what does this business need to look like. So it was a strategic plan, and let's define, what will be true in the future. How will we know that it's true? Like, how would we measure success? And then let's think about what connective tissue, has to be in place in the form of strategic initiatives, investments, priorities between now and then to get us there. In the course of that, we said, okay, what would this future business need from their leader? So kind of exactly what we've been talking about here. And I am not a recruiter. I am not a talent professional. So it was identifying some of the main behavioral and business acumen attributes.
Right.
It perfectly designed to then hand off to a competent HR or talent fulfillment specialist like yourself or their HR director. But what was really interesting is they came out of it. One, they owned what the future needed to look like as a board. In this case, the CEO was involved. So it would have violated your rule there, Mark, but that individual was involved. But what was also interesting is the board was now able to objectively talk about the next CEO in a depersonalized way because it was now about the business that we want, not the business that we have.
Right.
So saying the next CEO needs to do more of this wasn't necessarily an indictment of the current person. Now, I won't say that'll work all the time because every group has their own dynamics. But again, it's this underlying message of you need to know where you want the business to be.
Exactly.
To guide anything, to guide the technology you want to use, to guide the facility and infrastructure investments you want to make, to guide the merger and acquisition projects you want to pursue, to guide the people that you want to, who do you want to lead this company? It all comes back to having that strategy in place. But I'll get off my soapbox there.
No, I agree 100%. Exactly. Getting them to think forward is the hardest thing for them to do because they've been so reactionary to the ideas brought to them. That's the first step in the process.
And again, reactionary built on trust and results. It's actually the burden of strong leadership in some of these smaller company environments is actually it sort of insulates the board from having to do some of the things that governance would otherwise be required to do.
Exactly.
So I know we're coming up on time here, and I don't want to shoehorn this in too tightly, but I would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about this. So I live in Michigan. Michigan is home to EOS, or the Entrepreneurial Operating System, more popularly known as Traction, the book Traction by Gino Wickman. And so up here, and around the state, EOS is everywhere. And I know that's true in Minnesota as well. There's a pretty big adoption rate. But in my travels more generally within agribusiness, it's less so. So unscientific sampling here, but you all at Ag One Source are in very precious company, one of two companies in our industry that I know of that are being very disciplined in applying and utilizing EOS in your business. And there's others that are in exploration mode or have tried to self-implement and they're at different stages, but just a couple that are very rigorous in that. So we're not going to have a conversation about Traction or EOS specifically, but kind of panning back to think about the business that you run. Could you maybe just give listeners a high-level overview of what an EOS operating system is in your business? What does that mean? And what impact have you seen from using a disciplined operating system to kind of, behind the scenes run the organization?
Sure. And I'll give you a little backstory. The reason we chose to explore EOS was we were in a common situation, actually very similar to what we were talking about with the general manager situation, where the founder of our business had said he didn't want to work forever and wanted to retire at some point, right? And so he took our organization from point A to point B, and like the boards of directors, we just did whatever he wanted because he had got us. He'd been doing a great job. Why question that, right? And we knew that from a strategic planning standpoint, that the whole industry was changing and where we wanted to go may be different. And we needed some structure or some help guiding us to make sure that we were making the right decisions as a team, because similar to these boards, the leadership team didn't have to make decisions because we basically looked at our founder to say, what do you think? Yes or no? It's kind of like the gladiator, right? Thumbs up,
Mhm.
thumbs down kind of a deal, right? So EOS, fast forward, we interviewed some EOS implementers. Well, first we read the book Traction and said, oh my gosh, this is it. This is what we need. Even though the first pass was, wow, this is incredibly simple sounding. Can it be this easy? Right?
Yeah,
It's
like
it's
this is
it's very
airport
simple.
literature, almost inspired to throw it out. It's like so basic. Yeah.
Exactly, right? But it really caused us to really question again. Our founder did everything right. I'm not questioning how or why he did anything, but it's about getting from point B to point C now. Really tearing down the organization from the standpoint, is the culture that we had the right one for the future, right? The core values that we used to hire our talent in the past, is that still the right team to have in the future? And all of those things really helping us realize that a lot of the beliefs we held because we didn't know that there were other beliefs out there that could be successful, whether it was the structure of the business, the margin we could get, all of those types of things. And EOS provided the framework for us to, as a leadership team, start bringing ideas and making decisions as a team that actually worked and we were all 100% bought into. Whereas, again, we didn't realize it before, but when you have a founder as part of a business, or even the a family member running the business who's stepping away, not everybody is always on board with the decision, but you support it because they're the founder. Whereas now we have a very different leadership culture where we can't leave the meeting, we can't make a decision until we are all in agreement and support on the decision. And the trajectory of our business since implementing this 2 years ago is massive. The growth that we are seeing and the clarity that our employees have of not just where we're going, but how we're going to get there and why we're doing it, significantly different. We're no longer making the same assumptions with our employees that we used to, for sure.
I want to call out there, it's not a universal truth that over the last 24 months, recruiting firms, specifically in agriculture, have been a smashing success across the board.
Right?
Some have very much struggled, and in times like this, all the stress cracks emerge very quickly, and some of the deficiencies either in their ability to execute the work they need to do, their ability to build the business, to support clients becomes very clear. And so there is a correlation, if not causation, between the discipline required to run EOS and getting the results that you have.
Exactly.
Last question on EOS, Mark. One of the concepts, and I'll put a link to the book in the show notes for our listeners that maybe are familiar with it but haven't read it, or maybe are hearing about this for the first time. It is a quick, easy read, and it's not time that you wish you had back. Even if you don't do anything else with it, I guarantee you'll take some stuff away. So I think it's worth everyone having some exposure to. But one of the really interesting things about EOS is that it also pushes the leadership of the company to define what they call their three uniques.
Correct.
And so could you maybe talk about what the role of the three uniques are? And then I just love to quiz you.
Sure.
And what are the three uniques of Ag One Source?
Well, I will say, when we first met, I think I might have even shared our three uniques, and they're evolving, right? And that's the other thing, this framework allows you to evolve your business as the industry shifts and things like that happen to you. Every year, we annually reassess even our core values, right? Is this right for the future? But with that in mind, the three uniques, the way that they're structured are, there's some companies that do one of the same things as you. There's a few companies that may do two of the things, but there's no other organizations out there that do all three things like you, is the way. And that drives the way we hire, the way we market ourselves, the way we work with clients. And so currently the three uniques that we are looking at adopting, I will say, is number one of the things we've found is very unique is in the recruiting industry in particular, is that we are an employee-owned organization. So I mentioned that we had a founder, but in that environment, our employees are the shareholders of the company. So it was a very unique situation from that standpoint, whereas most recruiting firms are either large corporations or sole proprietorships where the profit goes to one person. In our case, Our employees actually have to invest in the company, so we aren't gifting shares or anything like that. They are actually making the investment, which, as you can expect, has a profound impact on employee retention and how they see the business. But more importantly, we are very focused on doing the right things for our customers because we all have a vested interest in that happening, right? So that's one very large unique. The second is that we focus on our clients' expectations together. And we focus on and develop our clients' expectations together, meaning, as we've been talking about for the last hour, I don't take a job description as face value. I actually push back on job descriptions pretty hard until you can prove to me that's exactly what you need. Most people will, for example, go back to a sales role. I guarantee a company can have a sales territory that's an expansion territory and a sales territory that is the top revenue territory in the marketplace, and the job description is going to be exactly the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
It gets even broader at the CEO level, right? So we will push back and help you redefine what you're actually looking for so that when you get that person, you're very, very happy. Because we get blamed if somebody doesn't work out, even if we follow our instructions, right? So we want to make sure that actually what they're asking for is what they need. And then the third unique is what I was sharing with the listeners earlier, which is the 4 pillars. That is that process that we use with organizations, whether it's for an entry-level role or a CEO role, of really digging into the culture, the behavioral style, the performance profile or expectations, and then the skills and experience, really defining what they need for the future and not getting hung up on who they had in the past.
Well, thank you for that. And, the 3 uniques, one, I think those are great in how they've been defined for your firm, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
It's an example of EOS and taking something that's so ostensibly simple.
Correct.
And the power that flows from having the clarity around it. So, many companies will do one of the things that you do, a few will do 2 of the things you do, but no one else does all 3.
Exactly.
I have beat the drum for a while here on the lack of true diversification and differentiation between many operators across the ag supply chain and in agribusiness. And I think if folks sat down and said, okay, we believe we're differentiated because we care about the customer, we're farmer first, and we always do what's right, they would realize that none of those are necessarily unique.
Exactly.
And if you dig deeper and say, well, that's part of our values, but the way we operate, the things that we do, here's what they are. There's huge value unlock. And there's a variety of other things in EOS around how do you identify if someone's the right person for a role and things like that. So again, it's not an EOS episode, but I wanted to have a chance to highlight that.
Definitely. Yep. I'm a huge fan. We would not be in the position we are today if we didn't embrace it 2 years ago. That's for sure.
Lovely. Well, Mark, we're at time. Great conversation. A lot of things I wanted to ask about, but I had to bridle myself in service of time and not having a 3-hour episode here. So thank you for what you do for the industry. Thank you for helping to shepherd and steward companies through these points of leadership transition to get them the people that they need to create the businesses they want that'll create a successful agricultural industry in the future. I think it's really important, and I appreciate what you do. And then, of course, I also wanted to say thank you for taking the time today to join the Pacesetter Pod.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. And I want to thank you as well, not just for being on the podcast, but I too appreciate what you do, because folks like you that are out there helping organizations figure out what they want to be makes my job a lot easier as well. And that's where, in a talent short market, hiring the wrong person is so easy because you have somebody at your door that on paper looks like they're the right person, but until you really define where you want to go with that person and what you want them to do, odds are you're not going to be happy in 3 years. So I appreciate everything you do as well.
You can make very easy, expensive decisions.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you also to our listeners for tuning into today's episode. I know and trust that you found something not just of interest, but of actionable value in my conversation with Mark today. And if you did, I'll ask you to do one thing. Please consider sharing this episode with someone that you think would find similar benefit in our industry. It's the very best way that you can support the show and the best way to help us elevate thinking around strategy execution across the ag value chain. Thanks again for joining, and I look forward to having you with us right here next time on the Pacesetter Pod.
This is the podcastfactory.com.